Welcome to another episode of Beyond Death, the podcast that isn't afraid to talk about death and the people and professions involved in investigating death and looking after the deceased. We are your hosts. I am Mark. I'm a forensic radiographer and a lecturer in forensic radiography. And with me is
Lindsay, and I'm a forensic radiographer and a diagnostic radiographer of quite a few years standing.
and Lindsay. Who do we have with us today?
Well, we are delighted to introduce you to Poppy Mardall, and she is a funeral director. Hi, Poppy, how are you doing?
I'm very good and I'm very happy to be here with you.
Excellent. Well, happy festivities for a start. Hope you got your baubles all lined up.
I do.
Um, so we're very, very happy to have you on board because it's not very often that in our field of work as forensic radiographers and the other complementary disciplines get to actually hear from a funeral director. So I'm going to kick off with just reading out your bio for people before we then go into the questions. So for everyone listening, hi there. So Poppy Mardall founded Poppy's Funerals in 2012 to bring a fresh approach to the outdated and unregulated trade. Poppy has helped thousands of people to create a funeral that works for them, and in 2021 was appointed as CEO to lead ambitious growth plans to normalise great care when someone dies. Poppy has previously been a trustee at Cruse Bereavement Support and a volunteer at the Royal Trinity Hospice and has been a Samaritan. Welcome, Poppy. So the first question I've got for you here is we've heard your bio there, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the funeral business and to be in the position you are in now?
Yes, thank you. It's not a very, it's a story that is a bit sort of round and about. I actually trained in art, so I worked at Sotheby's auction house. For me, this was very much a kind of that moment that some people get. I know some people get it in midlife. For me, I think it was more the kind of quarter life moment of, I want to do something more frontline. I want to do something more meaningful and purposeful. I'd grown up in a family that was quite obsessed with purpose. So my mum was a social worker and my dad was a teacher. And it took me a while to figure out where I wanted to have impact. There's no doubt that 3 or 4 exposés on TV in 2011 showing really, really bad standards of care in the funeral sector. So both showing appalling care in the mortuary, so racism in the mortuary, homophobia in the mortuary, people being told their dead people would be dressed, but the clothes going in a bag at the bottom of the coffin, that kind of thing. People being stored on the floor. And then on the side of grieving people, kind of overselling, mis-selling, manipulative sales techniques, a lack of choice. I felt very much, the more research I did, like grieving people and the dead were being kind of squashed into a process that made sense for funeral directors, when obviously we should be thinking about what grieving people need, and coming up with sort of ethical and values-led views on what good care of the dead looks like. And so really the seeds of Poppy started there. It was a sense of, this is going to happen to all of us. I would want really good care for myself and my family and friends. What do I think great care looks like? And Poppy's has been built from that. So our whole approach is about providing outstanding care for the living and the dead. So treating the dead as people rather than objects. If you were John in life, you continue to be John when you have died, and we want to care for you in the way that would be right for you, that's right for your family. And then when it comes to our grieving customers, it's about saying, what do you want? What do you need? Who are you? Rather than, do you want the kind of gold package, silver package, bronze package, differentiated by, one limousine or two. We come at it so that the people that we look after get exactly what they want and need, whatever that is.
Gosh, this is terribly refreshing to hear because I believe that the funeral business is still unregulated. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's particularly worrying because people assume it's regulated. It's one of those really vulnerable moments in life where you've got these assumptions that the government and the sector must have all these kind of checks and balances in place, and it's simply not true. So when you go to a funeral director, they, often they're members of trade associations, so there are people you can complain to, but the endless exposés on TV in combination with, the government run an investigation into the sector in 2021, which showed really, obscene sort of price rises, twice the rate of inflation. There's really no one looking at this work and making sure it's being done right, which is shocking.
And probably because generally people don't want to talk about death and don't want to deal with it, the unregulation is allowed to run free because people aren't holding people to task. And I must say, I was going to ask you a sub question. Have you had a lot of resistance in trying to improve matters for your clients?
We've had such an interesting experience because we're on our way to being 15 years old now. And at the beginning, yes, loads of resistance, just from the sector. So obviously not from clients who were from the beginning, the language you've used was what they said, thank goodness, this is so refreshing. This is what we hoped for. This is so different to our last experience. The resistance definitely came from the sector, which I think by its very nature is, traditional, protective, doesn't really like change. Often these businesses have been going for sort of 200 plus years and passed down in families that I guess have a very strong sense of protecting the legacy rather than thinking, of what great care might look like in today's world.
Yeah.
Wonderfully, over the years, that's changed. So I take great pride in knowing that, when our local cremator technician's mum died, he chose us. When our local hospital mortuary manager's brother died, he chose us. So I think there has been a kind of growing sense of like, yes, these people are doing things differently, but their values are great. And we are starting to see the sector change as a result of the work we're doing and others are doing to kind of bring up to date, a way of working that's horribly outdated.
Absolutely, Poppy. That is so, so brilliant. And I'm booking you for mine. And I'm not quite sure when it'll be, but you're definitely going to do me.
Privilege.
Mark, let me hand you over to the next set of questions.
Yes, thank you. That's really interesting, and I just wondered whether, in a nutshell, you could sort of give us an idea why those people that you talked about, like the local funeral director and the local mortuary manager, why would they come to you? Why are you so different from other funeral directors? What is it that makes you so special?
I mean, it's so simple that, I often think of this question like I should have some whizzy answer, but I just can't believe others aren't working the way we are. It's simply about treating grieving people as if they were you, and thinking, what would I want? I would want professional, efficient people who responded to my emails within the hour, who picked up the phone when I call, who knew my dead person's name, by name. It's very much about making people feel like they are special and that they are at the center of our attention and care. And we do that in the obvious ways, which is, as I say, it's about treating people like individuals. And I think that is particularly rare when it comes to the dead. So, we live in a society that really doesn't know how to relate to the dead body anymore. The dead body, I think, is genuine. I'm not sure the subject of death is taboo. I think people actually do really want to have that discussion. They just don't know how. I think the dead body is a very, very taboo thing. And people are really looking for guidance on how to relate to their dead people. And it's very common in the funeral sector, um, to call the dead person the deceased, to call the dead. I've been in mortuaries where the dead have been described as kind of it or as a thing or as a kind of big one, simply by, I'm thinking of the times where we go and collect people who've died at home, and the feedback we get again and again and again was, I was amazed that you treated my dad like he was my dad. You referred to him by name. You asked me if there was anything I wanted to do, if I could help. It's so simple. It's just about treating people like people, but it is not normal, and it should be the norm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite interesting. And I was only saying to someone the other day, I do some post-mortem examinations, CT examinations on the deceased. And obviously I'm used to dealing with live patients. And I find myself talking to these individuals as I put them in the CT scanner, because it seems a bit weird for me not to be talking to them. And they're not, I don't know. It seems a bit weird, and there I am talking to a dead body, but you're absolutely right. They are a person. And I feel that as I'm putting them on the CT scan, I want to just treat them as I would do anyone else, and it seems quite natural to me. But yeah, you can imagine someone looking in from outside would think it was a bit odd, really. But what do you enjoy most about your work then, Poppy? What is it that really grabs you about this and makes you want to do it, going to get up in the morning?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two parts to this. I think practically, I love the kind of stretch and the opportunity to learn. So I know it's shared by my team. So because we don't work in a kind of conveyor belt way, we're not selling the same thing over and over and again to people who, we're not squeezing people into our kind of ideas of what a funeral is. There is a real sense of, every call we get is a new start, and it is a kind of selection of priorities that are going to kind of stretch us and stretch our capability around what we can offer. So I'm thinking of families who've come to us with, complex and sometimes contradictory faith needs. Sometimes within one family there's more than one faith going on, and it's about how can we support this family and this community to do something which is authentic and has integrity and works for everyone. I'm thinking of funerals where there's going to be lots of children present, and you can come at that thinking, right, rather than are the children allowed to come to the funeral, why don't we design the entire funeral around the kind of viewpoint of a 6-year-old? And I know that's shared hugely in the team, that sense of really getting to the heart of what people need and then delivering that is meaningful, and it's kind of thrilling too, particularly in a sector that mostly sort of computer says no. I think there's another piece which probably goes way back for me and probably starts with my mum and dad's jobs and the conversations we used to have around the dinner table, which is, just I care hugely about those moments in life where there's vulnerability, particularly the ones that happen to all of us, whether that be birth, death, crisis. I think these are the moments where sometimes in communities we don't know what to do, and we're scared, and therefore we step back. And I feel strongly like if we could all just step forward an inch, we could handle those times much better than we sometimes do.
Yeah. And conversely then, what do you dislike about the job?
Oh, the hardest thing is when you're working with people who just, I think sometimes what happens is the death and the funeral brings up historic family issues. So I don't think they ever start there, but they are flared up by the emotion, the lack of sleep, the crisis. And sometimes you're watching people just tear each other to pieces, and there's very little you can do. We work hard to mediate, we work hard to kind of gently guide and advise, but we're with this family for max 6 weeks. We just can't heal generational wounds, and it's so sad. It's so sad to watch. I think that's my least favorite thing. But interestingly, it does send me home every time with a sense of like, must have that discussion with my parents, must remember to call my brother. So there is a silver lining personally.
Yeah, it is a very difficult time, isn't it? And I guess as well that you're dealing with people who have died perhaps after a long illness, and the family have been supporting them, and it's just the end of that for everyone. And you're right, all these things then come to the surface. It must be very difficult to deal with. Lindsay, can I just hand back to you for a moment?
Yes, I'm just following on from what you both were saying. So you get complex families. So I'm an adopted child, and I've recently found my birth family. It's those kind of things. And in funeral situations, we talk about inheritance, money, property that drives everyone into this rather odd state. And I've seen it when I was safeguarding adults lead as well, literally physical fights over the dying patient, so it's incredibly complex. So my next question to you, I'm going to load up a few questions in one. What kind of barriers do you see, and how do you overcome people's resistance in accepting the matter of death in your experience? And how do you, with all the emotional stuff that comes up, how do you switch off, and how do you deal with that, if you can kind of weave the answer into those questions?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm still dwelling on the first one personally and professionally, and I don't think I'll ever have that one cracked. Why do we struggle to have these discussions when we're healthy and well? Why do we struggle to talk about death to our children? Why don't we start these conversations from birth? Because we know where we are all headed. I know that the work I do has really informed, I've got 3 young kids, all under 10. And of course, people we love have died in that time. And when that has happened, in addition to the loss, I always feel so lucky to kind of both have the language, have the experience, and have had conversations with my kids, in the way before any of the drama came, so that when it happens, we're not in any way kind of inoculated against the suffering, but we do have language for what is going on. And I long for other people to have that language and that kind of experience of the conversation, because if you are starting to discuss the reality of death when it is right in front of you, it's just very difficult. It brings a real terror and anxiety. I mean, it's already scary, but I wish we were better at having those discussions. And I can only, I don't know, is it inherent in our humanity to be afraid of death, afraid of this kind of, doesn't matter how much science we have, there's still so much about it that's unknown. It's very uncontrollable. Even if we make our wishes clear, we don't know when or where. No doubt all of that unnerves us, but my experience is talking about it is sort of transformative for the quality of life. I think discussions around death bring deeper meaning to your daily life. So I'm a huge fan. When it comes to how I take care of myself, and it's interesting because it's really changed. I've been doing this work for 15 years, and when I started, I had a very wonderful partner who I'm still married to, but I didn't have any kids. And I think in those early days, I was also growing a business. I think it's youth. I think I thought, I'm here to help. I didn't think this could be me. It was like I was in the helper role. And I'm sure it's true if you went to kind of A&E or social work or teaching or nursing or kind of any of those worlds, that, when you first train, you're very much like, I'm here to help. And then as you get older, you think, this could be me. Like, this will be me. So I think in the old days, I would just sort of race through it and not reflect. And now I do need to take much better care of myself. And I do that by being quite boundaried. So I give a lot. It's in my nature to give a lot. I need to be therefore really careful about where the edges of that are and really clear about that. I do things like I swim at my local Lido. I grew up by the sea on the Isle of Wight, and I always long for the water. And I have a huge Lido local to me, and I dunk myself in it, and the freezing cold, I think, somehow shakes out the stress, or the that weight that you should feel when you're working with and for people who are carrying a lot of weight. It's natural that you would take a bit of that on, and I think you need to find ways to discharge it. And I think being in a really robust team of kind of open, emotionally intelligent people, that we talk to each other and we kind of share that load and burden together, and that's very strengthening and very kind of reassuring that we have each other's back.
Absolutely, well said. And it's about that team. And certain people are drawn to certain professions, and there are very unusual people in the death professions. So enlightening to hear your way of dealing with it. Could you describe a work situation that stayed with you, and why did it stay with you? One of those situations that you never shake off.
Yeah. There are so many with this. I feel like these situations happen every day when you work with death, but there is one that stays with me, I think, particularly powerfully. It was a weird thing that we come across in our work, that sometimes families find us because they've been told by other people, funeral directors, coroners, the police, that they shouldn't see their dead person. So I think the kind of seed of this story is this idea that that dead people are kind of sometimes not viewable, is the idea, because of the kind of condition of their body. And we seem to often hear from people who've been told, we wouldn't facilitate that. And so they found us to say, my brother died in the Thames, or my baby was stillborn, or my husband died in, faraway country and has been brought back to the UK, and I'm being told I shouldn't / can't see him. Are you going to stand in the way of that? And our answer is always, they are yours, they're not ours. Our job is to let you know what the experience would be like, so that you can make a really good decision about whether it's right for you. And there was a woman whose baby had been stillborn at, I think, about 6 months gestation, and the baby, with her permission, had a postmortem to help the couple kind of understand what might have happened. And she was just desperate to see him, desperate to see him, desperate to see him. And she'd spent some time with him when he'd been born, but she hadn't been able to see him since the postmortem. And for reasons that I completely understand, a number of people in the chain had been really, really worried about her experience, and that maybe she was expecting him to look the way he looked when he was born, and that he wouldn't. And she called me to say, if we got your help, would you stand in the way of me seeing him? And I was very clear that he was her son, and that, I would help her and support her to do whatever she needed to do. And I collected him, and, for lots of reasons, partly how the body is when you're born at that kind of very early state, there had clearly been a lot of change. And, even I was concerned about her experience. She was so excited to see him. She was so kind of bubbly and fizzy. And I thought, oh my goodness, you know, anyway, I talked her through the experience and put lots of thought into how I would kind of wrap him up or present him a way that felt really human and connecting for her. And she walked into the room with kind of me at her back where he was, and I felt nervous. I felt much more nervous than I usually would in that situation. And she just said, I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was something along the lines of like, you know, there you are, my baby. And it was this kind of reconnection of two people who loved each other. And yeah, I think that story stays with me as a reminder of the fact that humans need humans and humans need what they need. And for those of us with the privilege of supporting people, we should never, ever allow ourselves to become the authority on what is right for them. You know, we must listen to what they say and trust that they know what's right for them and facilitate what we can as best we can.
Gosh, that is so powerful. That's made my skin go all tingly.
I can't tell that story without crying every time.
No, I could hear it in your voice. That is so moving, and that's what we're dealing with. And you know, and that's so beautiful what you did. And then there's other families where no one can see the deceased because they're all fighting. You know, but that's so beautiful. Thank you, Poppy. Gosh. Right, and one more question from me, and that is, could you tell us something unusual about you?
There's so many weird things about me. Where to begin? I think the thing that, I mean, is it weird? Like I think people around me think it's weird that I find such kind of life-affirming energy in having these discussions, you know, that nothing is realer than a discussion about death. And I can't imagine, you know, if I got to live a really, really long life, I don't think there is a more interesting discussion than this one. And I will have this discussion until I am hopefully on my dying bed. I don't know if that's an unusual thing about me. I think it's rare, but I don't think it's, you know, we've been needing to have these discussions about death. We've been needing to practice ritual about death for hundreds of thousands of years. And the evidence of it is in the archaeological record. And I don't think it's weird, but I think it is unusual. And I want it for everyone else, because I think it's such a kind of life renewing thing to do, to be able to have
It is. Well, you're a communicator, an absolute communicator. And of course, with Mark and myself and all the other colleagues that we work with, death is our conversation. But in many other, you know, different friends that I have, they wouldn't entertain this on the table at all. There's things like Joan Bakewell did a Radio 4 program many years ago, all about the stages of how to deal with death. I don't know whether you know the Joan Bakewell, Radio 4. She did that, which is very standalone. You know, maybe it's time for you to do your own Radio 4 program. Who knows?
I'd be well up for that.
Good stuff. Okay, well, I'm going to now go back to Mark, because I think we are going to wrap this up in a minute, aren't we, Mark? Where are we?
We are, yeah. And usually at this point, we sort of try and summarize what we've learned. So I'm going to try and do that. And I think it's been really, really interesting talking to you, Poppy. And we could probably spend all afternoon having this conversation.
Here.
Because the three of us are pretty good at talking, and it's a fascinating subject which we're all sort of interested in. But I think the main point that's come out of it for me is how important it is to treat people as individuals, and the very fact that you're dead doesn't make you any less an individual. And that society has a real sort of issue about having these discussions, and it's really important for people like ourselves to be able to facilitate those sort of conversations with the bereaved, so that we can then support them through that bereavement and continue to treat the deceased as an individual, and make their passing and make their funerals and whatever religious ceremonies they have personal and individual, so that people don't lose that individualism in death, which, you know, sometimes sadly has happened in the past. So that for me is, I think, the key thing that's come out of it.
May I add another couple of things? So, like, it's demystifying, getting the conversations going, showing people choices, because I think often people think, oh, there's only like an expensive coffin or the cheaper coffin, and I've got to show off to my family. They just see it as money. And I think that probably the funeral service up to this point, and hopefully it's going to change now, has been a money-making exercise. I'm being quite bold there by saying that, because the light has never been shone on it. So I think to have such choices and diversity and respecting all the protected characteristics, where a lot of people are very afraid of being outed or secrets being told, that they are in safe hands with your service. So while that concludes today's conversation, I'm going to say thank you very, very much to Poppy. That was just real enlightenment. I'd love to talk to you more about this, maybe at another time in another place. But so Beyond Death, remember, it's not the end, because there's always more in our podcasts. And if you enjoy our episodes, please follow us, rate our channel. And we always love to hear some feedback. And I hope our listeners today have enjoyed meeting Poppy as much as Mark and I have.